This fall, the fastest way from here to there is on Pan American's new
non-stop services.
On November 8, 1957, 36 passengers and 8 crew members boarded the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, a plane named Clipper Romance of the Skies, for what they thought to be a luxury experience. The luxury airliner, operated by Pan Am World Airways, was set for its round-the-world flight. However, the passengers did not get the luxury trip they were expecting. Somehow during the flight, a big 4-engine long-range airliner with 44 people on board simply vanished from the skies. Despite many theories and an extensive investigation, what happened to the luxury airliner remains a mystery.
Hawaii's golden beaches and beautiful music are as close as tomorrow. Tomorrow, you can be in Waikiki, less than a day away by Pan American. Fly first class or tourist.
In 1947, Pan American World Airways, otherwise known as Pan Am, introduced its first round-the-world flight. The flight would stop in multiple cities over the course of several days before ending the trip on the opposite coast. During the flight, the passengers had the option to include extended stopovers in any of the cities along the way. A later flight would pick them up and continue their journey. Pan Am Flight 7 departed San Francisco for the first leg of the trip. The flight was expected to land at Honolulu International Airport 10 hours and 15 minutes later. At 5:04 p.m. that evening, the captain made his routine position report. He was 1,028 nautical miles east of Hawaii. He was then due to make his following report at 6 p.m., but no further communications were received. 40 minutes later, at 6:42 p.m., Pan Am notified the United States Coast Guard that they had not heard from the plane in more than 90 minutes. After another 90 minutes and no word was received from the flight, the Coast Guard dispatched the first search planes. On the first day of searching, 4 surface vessels, submarines, USS Cusk and USS Carbonero, and several aircraft from Honolulu were deployed. Additional planes and ships were set to join the search at dawn. Unfortunately, no sign of the plane was found during the investigation. At this point, everyone was still holding on to the hope that the vessel's radio was malfunctioning and that their navigation equipment had failed. However, at 3 a.m. on November 9th, it was declared that the plane would have run out of fuel, and the authorities presumed it to have come down somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. The next day, the search for Flight 7 more than doubled. There were now at least 30 aircraft and 14 surface vessels searching for the missing plane. The search continued for a week, and at the time became the most extensive search in the Pacific Ocean. Then, on November 14th, they found something. A Navy search plane came across a wreckage and bodies in the water about 900 nautical miles northeast of Honolulu. This was about 90 nautical miles north of the flight's intended track. One of the victims was still strapped in a seat. 19 victims were pulled from the water, with 14 wearing life jackets and none wearing shoes. This suggests that the passengers had received some warning before the plane crashed. 3 of the victims were wearing watches, which had stopped at 5:27 p.m., 23 minutes after the plane's last report. An autopsy revealed that the victims had died from drowning, and although there were burn marks on the wreckage, they were all above the waterline, indicating that the fire occurred after the crash. This was all the information they could recover from the aircraft's mysterious crash. Unfortunately, they could not recover any of the major components of the airliner. The ocean in the area was around 16,500 feet deep, meaning it was too deep to locate or recover any wreckage that may have fallen to the bottom. Both Pan Am and the FBI suspected that foul play had taken place. Although no conclusions have been drawn, there are a few theories about what happened to Flight 7 that day. During the investigation, a partial employee of Pan Am's own stood out: Eugene Crosthwaite, who had been working as a flight purser that day. Eugene had previously been in trouble with Pan Am for questionable behavior. He also resented the company after contracting tuberculosis while serving as a purser on Pan Am flying boats. Another interesting thing they discovered about Eugene is that he had lost his wife just 3 months before Flight 7 vanished. However, before it could be concluded that Eugene was to blame for the crash, another suspect was discovered. One of the passengers listed on Flight 7, William Harrison Payne, was the owner of Roxbury Hunting Lodge, California, and was flying to Hawaii to collect an overdue debt. However, the one-way ticket cost to Hawaii was more significant than the debt he was collecting. Not long before the incident, William took out 3 life insurance policies, including one for accidental death. William's body was never found. Investigators were convinced that William had brought down the aircraft to collect the insurance money and that he was never on the plane. Yet some believed there was yet another suspect. The aircraft had a history of problems, specifically with the propellers. A few times, pieces of the blades actually flew off. There was also an issue with the over-speeding propellers. An inspection and replacement or repair had actually been called on the particular plane, due to be completed no later than May 31st, 1957.
He's the world's finest commercial airliner.
The Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, like this, dubbed the ocean liner of the sky, was known for its luxury, 7-course gourmet dinners and champagne in the cocktail lounge.
Passengers would go down there for a drink or a smoke during the flight.
But on November 8, 1957, Pan Am Flight 7 disappeared with 44 people on board. The flight left SFO for Hawaii.
Is it possible that the issues were not fixed before Pan Am Flight 7 took the skies on November 8th? Although it has been over 65 years since the mysterious crash of Pan Am Flight 7, no definitive cause has ever been determined. The story of D.B. Cooper is one of the biggest aviation mysteries ever to occur, and although it remains unsolved to this day, pieces of evidence are still coming forward that may one day explain what happened. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 was preparing to depart Portland International Airport for a 30-minute trip to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. A man purchased a one-way ticket aboard the flight in cash under the name D.B. Cooper. Witnesses described Dan as a middle-aged man in his 40s. On the day of the flight, he wore a black and brown business suit, a black raincoat, and a thin black tie with a white shirt. The flight departed at 2:50 p.m., right on schedule. Shortly after takeoff, Dan handed a note to one of the flight attendants working on Flight 305. Florence, the flight attendant, assumed it was his phone number, so she dropped the note unopened into her purse. Dan leaned closer to her when she did this and whispered, "Miss, you better look at the note. I have a bomb." Once he had informed her that he had a bomb, he told her that he wanted her to sit next to him, and out of fear, she willingly obliged. Once seated next to him, Florence asked to see the bomb. Dan opened his briefcase just long enough for her to catch a glimpse of 8 red cylinders in 2 rows of 4, assumed to be dynamite. He then informed Florence of his demands. He wanted $200,000 of negotiable American currency in a knapsack by 5 p.m. along with 2 front and 2 back parachutes. The aircraft captain transmitted this request to Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota. He then started to make more demands. He now also wanted the fuel trucks to meet at the plane when it landed in Seattle, and no passengers would leave the aircraft until he had his money. Once he had his money and parachutes, he said all passengers would be free to go. Wanting to keep passengers safe, they fulfilled his request. The passengers are released. The aircraft landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport at 5:46 p.m., and Dan kept his word. Once he had his money and parachutes, all passengers were permitted to leave and exited the aircraft safely. However, he forced 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and a flight attendant to remain on the plane. At approximately 7:40 p.m., Dan had the plane retake the air. He asked the cockpit crew to fly the plane towards Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft. After takeoff, Cooper demanded the flight attendant and the rest of the crew to stay in the cockpit. Unfortunately, at the time, the cockpit door didn't have a peephole, and there were no cameras installed in the plane, so the crew had no idea what Dan was doing. Then at 8 p.m., a warning light flashed in the cockpit, indicating that the air stair had been activated. The pilots asked on the intercom if Dan needed assistance, to which he responded no. This was the last thing they ever heard from D.B. Cooper. The crew then noticed a change in air pressure, indicating that the door to the aircraft was open. Flight 305 landed at the Reno-Tahoe International Airport at 11:02 p.m. After landing, the crew confirmed that Dan was no longer on board the plane. An FBI bomb squad then searched the cabin for 30 minutes before reporting that the cabin was safe. No bomb was left behind. D.B. Cooper's fate remains a mystery still to this day.
When he got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger who gave his name as D.A. Cooper. But today, after hijacking a Northwest Airlines jet, ransoming the passengers in Seattle, then making a getaway by parachute somewhere between there and Reno, Nevada, the description on one wire service, master criminal. Bill Curtis reports.
During the hijacking, the police attempted to follow the plane and wait for someone to jump. However, the F-106 fighter jets they used proved to be useless at lower speeds. They then co-opted the Air National Guard Lockheed T-33, but Dan had already jumped before they could catch up to the hijacked plane. The FBI launched what would become one of the most intense and longest investigations in history, known as NORJAC, Northwest Hijacking. First, they began searching records for the name D.B. Cooper on the off chance the hijacker used their real name, but unfortunately they had no luck. Within the first 5 years of the investigation, over 800 suspects were considered, with almost all being eliminated. Before jumping, Dan removed his tie, allowing investigators to recover DNA. This was used to rule out a lot of potential suspects. Several months later, a man named Richard Floyd McCoy committed a similar crime. Due to the similarities in the crime, Richard became a prime suspect. However, he was later eliminated as he did not fit the description provided by the flight attendants. It has been speculated by many that D.B. Cooper did not survive the jump. This is because the location he jumped was above a heavily wooded area. There were strong winds at the time, and the parachute he used could not be steered. After many years of nothing but dead ends, in 1980, investigators made a discovery. An 8-year-old boy had found a decaying package containing $5,800 buried in the sand along the Columbia River, north of Portland. The serial number on the money matched those from the ransom. However, despite the extensive search, nothing else was recovered. In 2016, the FBI decided to close the investigation, stating that its resources could be better used on other cases, leaving the crime the only unsolved air piracy case in commercial aviation history. Before continuing with the last mystery, you've watched this far, why not consider subscribing to our channel? We go through new scary and enigmatic mysteries every week, so subscribe to make sure you stay up to date with the new releases. The Bermuda Triangle, a section of North Atlantic Ocean off North America, in which more than 20 planes and 50 ships are said to have mysteriously disappeared. A fate that was shared by British South American Airways, BSAA, aircraft Star Tiger. Star Tiger, a passenger aircraft departing London for Bermuda, vanished without a trace in the early morning of January 30th, 1948. No signs of Star Tiger or her 31 passengers and crew were ever found. Star Tiger departed London for a flight to Bermuda. However, a failure of the cabin heating system and compass problems caused the plane to make its first overnight stop in Lisbon, Portugal. Star Tiger was set to continue to Santa Maria, Azores, where they would stop to refuel the plane before continuing to Bermuda. That morning, the passengers and crew had boarded the Star Tiger and were waiting for their flight to begin when they were told that they'd have to return to the airport waiting room. Why? Because the port inner engine needed attention. 2.5 hours later, the plane was ready to go and the passengers and crew boarded the aircraft again. The plane landed in Santa Maria for what was meant to be a 75-minute refueling stop. However, the weather was so poor that the captain decided that they would stay overnight. The next day on January 29th, despite there still being strong winds and heavy rain, Star Tiger took off for Bermuda, a 12-hour-long journey. At 3:15 a.m., the pilot reported the plane's position and said the aircraft was on track to land at 5 a.m. that morning. At 3:15 a.m. and 4:40 a.m., the operator from Bermuda tried to make contact with the Star Tiger, but no communication was ever received. Then 5 a.m. passed, and the plane never made the landing. Star Tiger was never seen or heard from again. The Bermuda operator immediately declared a state of emergency. The U.S. Army Air Force, USAAF, launched a massive rescue operation. The operation consisted of 26 aircraft that flew for 882 hours searching for the Star Tiger. The search lasted for 5 days before it was abandoned due to bad weather. Despite the extensive search effort, they found no sign of the aircraft, passengers, or crew. During the investigation, the team came up with many observations and theories about what could not have happened rather than what might have happened. The disappearance of Star Tiger without a trace had them all baffled. No one knew what could have possibly happened to the aircraft. So what could have happened? Although no conclusions have ever been made, one possible theory is that the plane was accidentally flown into the ocean. In several previous communications, the crew had wrongly transmitted the altitude of the flight. They had shared it as 20,000 feet. the altitude the plane typically flies at, but due to the stormy weather that day, they had decided to fly 2,000 feet. The flight was long, and it was possible that the crew would have been exhausted by the time they began preparing for the landing. Therefore, a plausible theory is that when it was time to start the flight's descent, the crew forgot that they were already at 2,000 feet rather than 20,000 feet. By the time anyone realized it, the crew may have simply flown the aircraft into the sea. No distress calls were received from the aircraft, evidence that this is a possibility. Star Tiger was equipped with 4 engines and could not have easily reached Bermuda on 2 engines. However, the lack of altitude could have made engine failure or any handling problems more dangerous. No previous BSAA flight had ever flown so low for so long. The wind forecast at this altitude would have been unreliable. Consequently, a sudden gust of wind could have been enough to plunge the aircraft into the sea. At such low altitudes, any indentation on the crew's behalf, along with the faulty altimeter, could have also been enough to dive the plane gently into the sea, leaving the operator no chance to transmit a distress signal. However, these theories are just a possibility. As to what might have happened to the missing Star Tiger flight, the real truth remains a mystery.